agricultural innovation system. And as we see in the case of agricultural policies, globally, there is an enormous amount of support that is provided to agriculture, which the OECD estimates to be 700 billion in the period 2019 every year. And this is, we've observed that most of this support is provided in the form of higher prices that lead what we call a positive market price support. And the effects of this positive market price support in general are not good for consumers, are not good for the competitiveness of the industry or to the environmental outcomes of the whole food system. And at the same time, these market price support interventions, which are related normally with import restrictions or with export restrictions, because sometimes these are negative market price support as well, as we can see in the graph, and they contribute to increase world price volatility. Of course, that's not good for investment and for innovation, and shifts try to shift the pattern of the adjustment to market changes from domestic to foreign farmers. When we look to the total support and what is its composition, we see that the total support, out of the total support, the amount that goes for the provision of general service and public goods and with targeted to consumers is relatively small compared to the total. And when we look in most of the countries, what happens is that consumers pay higher prices than would otherwise take. And the amount of support that it really goes to these general services that include the agricultural innovations and knowledge systems, it is as only a very small part of these general services that are in the slide. So it's a small amount compared to the total. Most of them are most distorting, and we know this most distorting support contributes negatively to the environmental outcomes and make it more difficult for the private sector to take the lead on responding with innovation to the societal demands. We have applied this framework to 14 countries, 14 different in-depth country studies, as we have mentioned before. I show you here the publication that was published in 2019 and covers the main findings out of these studies. The main recommendations are going first in the direction of defining what are the government's role in agriculture innovation and how it has evolved over time. And we observed that there has been an improvement. The focus now on government's role on innovation is on improving the impact of public expenditure rather than increasing the expenditure and making the system more collaborative, more demand-driven to increase adoption. Because if it's not linked to the demands from the society and from the farmers and from the consumers, it will not be able to contribute to the challenges. It has to be. It is moving more to this kind of demand-driven approaches, but in general, still the top-down approaches continue to exist and dominate in many countries. These top-down approaches means that basically the research is starting on the top, and it's supposed to be, it's not very well connected to the demand that is existing from the markets and from consumers. And this lack of connection and interaction between the demand and the supply of research and knowledge is a concern for the well working of the agricultural innovation systems. Governments are dominant particularly in what is agricultural research and particularly primary research, while in general private sector tends to focus on more specific areas and sectors like genetic improvements, fertilizers, chemicals, machineries, and processing. At the same time, there is a trend to research funding being channeled through these more competitive project funding processes, which aim, of course, to increase the relevance and therefore also the adoption. Governments also apply more and more tax rebates and tax deductions for firms and farms in order to facilitate this investment, rather than taking the decision of which kind of innovation investment needs to be done. And also the work on enforcing the intellectual property rights is crucial to keep the private innovation in place. And public-private collaborations are very frequent and advancing also in all the agenda of the agricultural innovation systems. But in general, it's observed that in some countries, the capacity of the local agri-food companies to engage on this remains limited. There is a renewed policy attention to foster adoption of innovation. And this is downstream compared to the direct research, but it's very important that this adoption is increased by farmers and firms. And basically that requires the improvement in the ways the advisory services take place as well, the extension services, and finding new intermediary actors as well that can provide the services required to the adoption of the innovations. Let me finalize with 4 main recommendations to improve the sector's productivity and sustainability. The government should reorientate agricultural policies towards long-term productivity and sustainable objectives. Only with these kind of right incentives will the private sector be able to lead the process of innovation. Governments should make the agricultural innovation system more responsive to the agricultural needs, and they should ensure a stable and enable policy and regulatory environment. This is very important for the innovation to take place, and particularly to the private sector to take the lead. Finally, governments should improve the overall policy coherence, because sometimes there is incoherence between some areas of policy and others. It could be, for instance, in the research policies compared to the agricultural policies, but it could also be in the taxing system or in the education policies. This kind of coherence is crucial for having the right incentives for the innovation systems. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Jesus. It's very interesting. You spend a bit more time, but that's all right. Let's move to the second presentations on embracing embracing innovations, new technologies, and digital opportunities for food security, that will be presented by Dr. Emily Gray. Emily is agricultural policy analyst at the same agency, OECD, the same directorates with Jesus, and she thematic lead for innovations and digital agriculture. Before joining OECD, she worked at the Australian Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics and Science, AIBAR. She got PhD in Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Sydney. Emily, the time's yours.
Thank you very much. Is it easiest if I share my screen, or?
Okay, you go ahead.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. I very much appreciate the very warm welcome from Professor Talim and Professor Thomas. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of the Indonesian Research Union's seminar. As my colleague Jesus said, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to connect with you. Digital technologies, which of course are the focus of my presentation, do make these kind of interactions possible, of course, and that's a wonderful thing for us all as researchers. Also, as Jesus said, my presentation does focus mainly on agriculture and the implications of digital technologies for the agricultural sector and food security. But of course, agriculture's digital transformation is taking place within the broader digital transformation of countries' economies. So many of these insights are relevant for other sectors as well, and of course for policymakers and researchers more broadly. So today I'd like to share with you some insights from some of our work on the digital transformation of agriculture. And of course, I'm drawing on some work by several of my colleagues as well, not just myself. I would like to sort of discuss with you how the digital transformation can benefit farmers, and not just large-scale farmers, but also smallholders, including by enabling environmentally sustainable productivity growth. Environmentally sustainable productivity growth is going to play an important role in achieving food security in all countries. In the long term, growth in food production relies on productivity growth and, sorry, is there a problem with, no? And it depends on sustainable improvements in agricultural productivity. In addition, this is because it increases food production directly, but it's also a way of improving the welfare and incomes of rural areas and of farmers. So it increases both access to and availability of food. But one thing it's also important to note is that it's quite important for actually enabling agricultural and food trade as well. And trade plays an important role in food security because it helps, because well-functioning domestic markets and international markets connect farmers, including smallholders, to opportunities. And those kind of opportunities are important in driving growth. So in terms of digital technologies, what kind of technologies are we actually talking about? Essentially, the information and communication technologies, the internet, mobile technologies and devices, and also data analytics. So essentially, the kind of technologies that improve the capacity to collect data. This includes remote and in situ sensors, precision agriculture, and farm machinery that's connected to the Internet of Things, but also the kind of technologies that allow us to make use of that data, data processing technologies, new ways of sharing data on agriculture and other types of information, and new ways of actually using that information. This brings me to probably one of the most important points. When we talk about what is the digital transformation of agriculture, it's all about data and using data in the agri-food sector. Digital technologies allow us to produce more data. These technologies, such as sensors and connected devices, mean we can collect and generate more data on agricultural activities, on natural resource use, as well as on farming communities. They also allow us to use these in more efficient, more effective ways, and also to produce information that farmers and different stakeholders can actually use to make better decisions on farms. It's also important to note that the digital transformation is not just about high-tech digital farms. Yes, digital technologies offer opportunities for all kinds of technologies, for drones, robotics, the Internet of Things, and farms that are integrated into the Internet of Things. But there are also lots of low-tech solutions, mobile devices, different kinds of applications that all kinds of farmers, including smallholders, can use. So in terms of what the opportunities are for the agri-food sector, digital technologies offer a way to improve their efficiency, to create new sources of value in terms of their production. It can help agriculture become more sustainable, more productive, but also more resilient to risk by allowing farmers to incorporate information on markets, on the weather, on the optimal timing of particular inputs, alerts about the presence of pests. And the digital opportunities also can be important for allowing farmers to connect to agri-food value chains and trade. But when we talk about innovation, innovation doesn't just occur on farms and in research institutes. There are also opportunities for innovation within the policy space. In particular, policymakers can be using digital technologies to design better policies for farmers and to implement them in more effective and efficient ways. I'd like to touch briefly on some of the digital opportunities for agri-food trade in the sector. As I mentioned before, trade is an important enabler of agricultural productivity growth, not output growth and productivity growth, because it provides that incentive and opportunity to improve efficiency and production. Returning then to this question of why data is so fundamental to agriculture's digital transformation, one reason is that the agricultural sector is a consumer of data. This includes information on markets, weather forecasts, pest alerts, information on that's provided through services, for example, information that helps farmers to decide how to optimize production, professional services for the agriculture sector. But agriculture also is important because it produces data that is used elsewhere in the agri-food sector. For example, increasingly we find that the ability to trace products through agri-food value chains is important for all countries. Data is an important part of that. Being able to have evidence of how a product was produced, how it's been processed, and how it's moved through a value chain. This can be important for private standards. For example, private agri-food companies might require farmers to do particular activities on farm, but also for public standards and regulations, and also the kind of regulations that are important to access markets. One of the other things that I think we've found in a lot of our work here at the OECD is, and I don't think I'm saying anything particularly surprising, is that agri-food trade is increasing, and it's increasingly global. Trade flows are increasing, including between emerging and developing countries, and a lot of this is happening in global value chains, food processing value chains that are spread over multiple countries, linking the agri-food sectors in one country, for example, with processing sectors and other sectors in other countries from across the world. Countries have a lot to gain from this, and digital technologies play a particular role in that as well. They offer ways to manage and use the information and data in value chains that allows producers to actually connect to this. They play a role in facilitating trade and cross-border customs processing, which of course is particularly important when you're talking about perishable agri-food products. They can also help to make sure that food value chains are more resilient and integrated. For example, by allowing different participants in a value chain to make decisions about when particular activities might need to be activated. So returning to this, why again this is important for food security. Again, to repeat the point that sustained growth in demand is an important enabler of agricultural growth. Digital technologies can reduce the constraints that often smallholders might face in terms of participating in agri-food value chains. This can include addressing liquidity constraints, for example. Digital technologies might provide a new way for farmers to receive secure payments, timely payments, and also a way to access new types of finance, for example, trade-specific finance. In some countries, farmers struggle to engage in global value chains because it's difficult to prove compliance with either private or public standards. Digital technologies offer a way to actually provide information to help farmers to do this, as well as ensure that that information is transmitted along value chains. They also provide a way to provide extension, advisory training, and advisory services and training to farmers, particularly to those farmers who might not actually be well connected to public services that rely on face-to-face interactions. For example, farmers in maybe more remote areas. It can also allow farmers to get timely information on prices and the kind of production standards they need to meet. So as I mentioned earlier, the digital transformation doesn't just offer an opportunity for innovation on farms, in value chains, and in research institutions. it also offers an opportunity for innovation in the policy space. And of course, as Jesus mentioned in his presentation, it's not just research that plays a role in driving sustainable agricultural productivity growth. The wider enabling environment for the sector is an important factor in whether farmers can be more productive and more sustainable because of the signals, the capacities, and potentially the constraints that might arise from the policy environment. Of course, in many instances, existing agricultural and agricultural environmental policies are sometimes operating in a second or third best world. They might be constrained by incomplete information. For example, it may be very difficult to understand what the impact of a policy is because it's simply too costly or too expensive to find out that kind of information. There may be problems also of asymmetric information. While the farmer has information about how the policy affects them and how it will change what they do, the policymaker may not have that information. Similarly, the effects of a particular policy might be offset by a different policy that encourages or requires a farmer to do something else. We already see in a lot of OECD member countries and other countries, the governments are in fact using digital technologies to improve how they implement policies for the sector. For example, GIS data, platforms for communicating with their farmers, but there are in fact a lot more opportunities. For example, again, there's this opportunity for governments to use online platforms to deliver government services and interact with farmers. This might provide a way for policymakers to connect with a much greater range of farmers in a much more timely manner than previously. Governments have an opportunity to define data-driven policies and to actually get a better understanding of how well their policies are actually performing. You know, are their policies actually achieving what government wants them to do? And of course, in this respect, again, research institutes play a significant role in helping governments to evaluate policy. Governments can also rethink how they actually monitor compliance with particular policies. For example, if there might be opportunities to see farmers who are doing well with a particular objective, and instead of having a very blunt method of evaluating that, be able to identify the successes and provide rewards for that. For example, through reputational means. Governments might also be able to make use of algorithms to improve how they implement some of their functions. Digital technologies also provide an option for a completely new approach to policies. For example, one area that's becoming increasingly interesting are the co-innovation approaches, where farmers and communities who have a stake in a particular policy are able to interact with the government through digital technologies to actually make sure that a policy provides the best way of achieving that particular policy objective. And these co-innovation approaches go beyond even policy itself. For example, some of our ongoing work on resilience to natural disaster risk has found that co-innovation between farmers, between researchers and policymakers to develop digital tools for improving decision-making, these tend to lead to the most valuable tools for farmers, the ones that have the highest uptake amongst the community. There are also opportunities for digitally delivered services, artificial intelligence and virtual reality farm advisory services. Some of these things I think still maybe feel like they're a little far off in the future, but there are plenty of companies that are working to develop these services. One thing I found earlier last year is in participating in a webinar on extension services, is how in many countries public and private extension services shifted to providing this information digitally because of the COVID-19 pandemic, finding new ways to interact with farmers because they were no longer able to go out there and actually speak with farmers and meet with them. So that advice had to come through a webinar. through this kind of an interaction through Zoom. There's also the opportunity for more to use real-time data and incorporate into policies. For example, policies that reflect what's going on in the world at the moment. For example, current climate and pest conditions. There's also opportunities to target policies to particular areas. For example, targeting areas that can yield particular environmental benefits or need help to improve their environmental performance. But of course, digital technologies do come with a range of challenges. I've mentioned for policy here, but I think these kind of policies apply to research institutions as well, and of course to farmers also. There are the issues we might refer to as path dependencies. For example, current IT systems in government departments, in research institutions, might constrain what can actually be done. Policymakers, researchers, and of course farmers might lack the right skills to actually adopt these technologies and use them in an effective way. And of course, another big one, attitude. Are organizations and their staff willing to do something different? For example, are extension agents willing to try delivering this information virtually in addition to more traditional face-to-face mechanisms? There's also can be a challenge in actually making use of data. As I mentioned earlier, the digital transformation is all about data, but there is still a need to actually make sure that it's used effectively. This includes finding ways to use data that come with different quality, that has different temporal, comes from different periods and at different spatial scales. And also recognizing that using data and relying on algorithms does introduce a bias into decision making, and making sure that those kind of issues are managed. There can also be a whole range of regulatory constraints, and this is the kind of issue that does pop up for data and particularly for research. While a lot of data on farms might be highly valuable for researchers, privacy and confidentiality constraints might mean that they aren't able to use it. Finding a way to actually manage that risk is going to be important in order for data to be used by researchers, for example, by policymakers, to actually get a better understanding of how well policies are working. In addition, regulation itself may stop policymakers from using data. For example, if a regulation says a particular policy needs to be managed and implemented with a boots on the ground approach, then it will be very difficult to use digital tools. There are also risks for policies and risks for researchers who are using this data. The risk of data breaches, the risk that data is accessed by people who shouldn't have access to that data, which could jeopardize the social license of research institutions to use farm data, for example. The importance of having transparent decision making, a policy that can't make use of digital technologies, and therefore make it difficult for those members of the community, those members of the agricultural sector who can't access those technologies to benefit from the policy. Understanding when it's appropriate to allow an algorithm, for example, to be driving a policy-making decision. Finally, things like creating new dependencies. If you rely too much on models and algorithms, there's the risk that you become equally rigid and lose the flexibility to actually respond to the context. Finally, I do have a few insights in terms of recommendations for how the agricultural sector can benefit best from the digital transformation. And again, this links back to some of the points that Jesus made about the importance of an enabling environment, not just for the digital transformation, but for innovation in countries more broadly. Policies and regulations will determine how well digitalization progresses in the agri-food system. It will affect what kind of activities can be digitalized on farms. It will affect how farm data can be accessed, transferred, used by research institutions, linked with other data sets that allow for more holistic research and evaluation of policies. Similarly, where data is stored and managed will also matter because it can affect who will access it. And importantly, digital technologies will have a smaller impact if there are weaknesses in the wider enabling environment. Yes, digital tools can help smallholders to connect to markets, but if transport and trade infrastructure, physical infrastructure is weak, there'll be a limit to how much they can gain. Similarly, if farmers don't have the capacity to meet quality standards, then having digitally provided advice will still limit how effective that is. And of course, there are a number of other conditions that determine how well digitalization can progress. Of course, the importance of digital connectivity. If there is not a digital data infrastructure that allows producers to connect to digital tools and use them, then promoting digital tools will have a limited effect. There are opportunities, nevertheless, to use digital technologies to make better policies for food security. To my mind, I think here often the key opportunities come from the technologies that build farmers' capacities. For example, looking for opportunities to provide digitally delivered services does offer a very potentially high payoff. From a research perspective, finding ways to promote access to agricultural data so that it can be used to make better policies, develop services for farmers, and to be used in research. It's also important that digital tools are accessible. There's a risk that there will be a digital divide, a divide between farmers who can adopt and take on digital tools and those who don't have the capacity to. In this respect, for example, not just digital infrastructure and connectivity, but also making sure that farmers have the skills to use these tools. And finally, as I mentioned at the beginning, agriculture's digital transformation is happening as part of the wider digital transformation of countries' economies. Any policies to enable digital technologies need to be considered in this wider context. For example, it's unlikely that we'll see agriculture-specific regulations. Nevertheless, it's important that agriculture and researchers have a voice in these kind of discussions on regulations to make sure that their regulations do in fact enable the sectors to make use of digital tools. I have here some links to some of the work that we've been doing on digital agriculture. Professor Talim is welcome to share these slides so that you can connect to these publications if you wish. And thank you again. These are some of the members of the digital agriculture team, some former members, but we certainly look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to the discussion to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emily. It's very inspiring presentation. I think it's a lot of new area that we still need to explore further. Well, for the interest of time, I would like directly invite our discussion, Professor Bambang Subianto. Professor Bambang currently research professor on biomaterial at the Indonesian Institute of Sciences, LIPI in Bahasa Indonesia. He has held many strategic leadership positions in the past, start as director and then deputy to the chair and then vice chair and chairman of LIPI. He completed his PhD and MS from on forestry science from Kyoto University, Japan. Prof. Bambang, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Prof. Talim. Can you hear my voice?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good morning in Paris and also good afternoon in Indonesia. And I want to say that thank you very much, Dr. Jesus Anton and Dr. Emily Gray. This is very nice presentation and a lot of information which that all of almost the information they need to apply in Indonesia. As you know that Indonesia is rather complicated about the agriculture. And the first is I would like to discuss about the R&D expenditure. So maybe some participants ask why Indonesia not appear in your graphic for research development. Yes, I understand because as you know the R&D expenditure for Indonesia is very low, 0.2%. So why a very small and very low, and plus is the distribute to the a lot of research institution and ministerial institution research. So why our government make some new policy? What they said introduced by Professor Talim that we develop National Research and Innovation Agency who is to coordinate all of the research in the research institution, also the ministerial, especially for budgeting. So we become one box in budgeting in National Research and Innovation Agency. So that's and also we also the push of the participation from the private sector for research, because as you know, almost in Indonesia research and private sector not so much participate in the research for the national research. I mean, so why the innovation in Indonesia not so developed well compared to Thailand and Singapore and so on. And especially for the agriculture, it's very low participation from the private sector, because as you know, the big problem in Indonesia is our ownership of the land is very small. Maybe Dr. Anton and Dr. Emily know that it's a very small land ownership of land in Indonesia of farmer. So why our government also have some new policy to develop 1 million hectares food estate crop in Kalimantan, middle of Kalimantan. That's why they start in this year, and the possibility to like that's to develop for the estate crop maybe in Papua and also in Nusa Tenggara. I think that's why what the Dr. Jesus or Dr. Emily said, how to use the machinery to the agriculture of Indonesia. I think that's very difficult because the small area, so not effective. So why the cost of the agriculture or farmer is very high, so not competitive compared to the China or Thailand. So why a lot of agriculture product import from the China, and then the second is yes, I think I agree with the Dr. Jesus Anton that how to increase the income of farmer. As you know, Indonesia the highest income for the agriculture trading is trader and intermediate person, and between the farmer and the market. So why now using IT, what the suggestion from Dr. Mili, the young people, especially who understand well about IT, to eliminate the intermediate. So they directly to communication with the family, with farmer, and also open the online market. So that is why the IT very important for Indonesia for small scale, but not for the for the big scale. And also, I think that's very important in Indonesia. Sometimes Indonesia agricultural product price very low, sometimes very high. For example, chili, Indonesia. Now, the price is 100,000 per kilo. But someday, if the over production, only 10,000 rupiah per kilo. So why that maybe we need strategy to how to the planning the plantation timing based on the maybe from the national aerospace agency who have data about the raining on the weather or the climate, the local. So I think with the policy, or that say the Dr. Emily using IT, not only the central government, but very important also for the local government, because there's a lot of government and a lot of island in Indonesia and a very different climate change on. We need more information data to collect data. So I hope that very important from now, the IT, IoT is very useful for Indonesia. Especially, I very agree to the Dr. Jesus and Dr. Emily, how to use the IT or IoT to increase the farmer income. That is our target now. That's time is running fast. I think my comment enough this year. Thank you very much. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Jesus and Dr. Emily. It's very great. I hope you can come again to Indonesia and discuss more detail of the how to develop the agriculture, especially for local small farmer, also in the big scale of the 1 million estate crop. Thank you very much. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam, Prof. Bawang. Thank you very much for entertaining us with some comment. For the interest of time again, Jesus and Emily, do you mind if we invite the comment, a question from participant first, and then you respond later? What do you think?
That's fine for me.
Okay.
For me as well. Thank you, Talim.
Yeah. Okay. Because there are some questions already on the chat room, but I would like also a participant to indicate yourself also to make a comment or question directly. But let's see some of the comment from the chat room. Can we share? Okay. Okay, make in poll. Okay. The first question from Mr. Rizal Maludin of Pelipi. Okay, incentive matter for innovation. If nation leader aware about this and could provide unlimited incentive for innovation system. So how do you measure the ideal investment for innovation system in each country? Okay, that's for Jesus, I think. For Emily, since the trade is important, so how digital technology support the farmer in developing countries in the case of standard in international trade? Next question from colleague, Professor Haji Semiring of Ministry of Agriculture. Figure of expenditure on R&D, we could not find the number for Indonesia. Yes, Professor Bambang already mentioned it because very small. For Emily, what is your assessment on digital agriculture? Is there any particular attention need to be done? Okay, third, from Ali Pramono again from Ministry of Agriculture, Wellington. What kind what kind of incentive are appropriate for Indonesia farmers. So they would like to do adaptation and mitigation greenhouse gases from agricultural sector. It's very specific question. For question from Mr. Rudy Handoko of Fiscal Agency of Ministry of Finance. This is for Emily Gray. What do you think applying the high pace surrounding advanced technologies such as IoT, blockchain, agricultural drone on Indonesian agriculture in order to achieve sustainable productivity? That's also part. Any more question that from audience that would like to raise directly? Anybody would like to speak directly in addition to writing in the chat? No, not yet. Okay, Jesus and Emily, there's some comment from Professor Bambang, and there are also questions from the audience. So it's time for both of you to respond. Time is yours. Jesus first.
Thank you, Talim, and thank you, Professor Subianto, for your comments and for all the participants for their questions. I will try to give some answers on the extent of my knowledge, of course. And I apologize for not having data on research and development in the graph in Indonesia we had. I don't think the main reason is because the number is small. It is because for whatever reasons the OECD does not collect this information. But I will check that again and come back to Italy to see if there is the case that there is some information available in the OECD for this. But as far as I know, there is not this information available for reasons that escape to my knowledge. There are several comments from Professor Subianto were very interesting. I mean, you make the point, and you are very right. The fact that the push of the private sector is crucial for all the innovation system, and that is a key requirement. I don't know I'm not so much knowledgeable about the exact reality of Indonesia on this, but of course the leadership of the private sector in the innovation process, including in I hear some echo. Hopefully you are hearing me well. Can you hear me well? Okay. Yep. So and the comment that Professor Subianto was taking on the ownership of land also shows very much how the whole policy environment matters in order to innovation, and it's a very good point. In the sense that, of course, without the appropriate property and property rights for the land, it is very difficult that the appropriate investments are made, and afterwards the application of innovation and adoption in the land is possible. I would be very much interested in hearing from Talim or from other experts from you on the exact details of this initiative from the government on the state land in Kalimantan to make sure this 1 million new hectares to know exactly what is the link with the ownership of the land, which I think is an interesting one for the longer term, to make sure that innovation is applied also in these type of initiatives. So your feedback on this could be extremely useful and interesting. Of course, in order to increase the income of farmers, including making farmers more innovative and learning about how they can better connect with the demand and as well to participate better in the value chain is crucial. And I can only agree on this. And for this, of course, it is crucial to have the appropriate knowledge transfer to farmers in this sense, and this knowledge transfer is often done through the extension services, but also through other service providers. And it's very important to privilege the knowledge on new technologies in this transfer of knowledge to the farmers in this sense. But also we have to think that for all these kind of things is crucial, not only the agricultural policies or the incentives that we provide, but also the general infrastructure that is available. And it will be very difficult to connect to and use high digital technologies without having the appropriate broadband access and internet access in the rural areas. So all these are crucial interlinks with other policies. The question that was made by some of the participants about what is the ideal system, how we can measure it of innovation system, I think it is not a question. You're saying, suppose that you have enough resources, how you can develop an ideal system. And the idea is that it is not for the government to design the whole ideal system. It is to create the appropriate environment in order to have the ideal system. It's not a question of how much budgetary resources you have from the government. Of course, you need some budgetary resources from the government, but the key thing is creating the appropriate whole environment, and that requires to be sure that the regulations don't impede the private sector taking the initiative to innovate, to respond to the demands that are coming from the markets, but also from the society as a whole, and creating the appropriate incentives to respond to these demands, including, of course, environmental demands. And this brings to the last question that was raised from one of the participants, which was about the what would be the appropriate adaptation or mitigation policies for mitigation actions for greenhouse gas emissions in farming in Indonesia. I have to confess I'm not an expert on this, and it would be very difficult for me to tell exactly what would be the appropriate measures to be taken. But definitely what we have to think, we were talking about advisory services before and about the extension services. It is crucial that the priorities in terms of the environmental sustainability, including the greenhouse gas emissions and the adaptation to the reality of what is happening in different locations in Indonesia, because Indonesia is a very diverse country, as we very well know, and that requires that the extension and the advice that is provided is very well informed. There is flow of knowledge to the advisory services and to the extension service, and this knowledge is passed to farmers that they take the decisions on how better take care of their land in order to adapt to the new realities coming from climate change, which could be specific in different locations, and therefore the adaptation decisions will be different in different locations. And also to be able to respond with mitigation measures. Maybe it could be a very, it is very important then to have the advisory services and new service providers having this knowledge and making sure that you have the flexibility and the capacity to improve this knowledge and these skills in the advisory services so that they arrive to the farms. And at the same time, making sure that there are incentives for getting and using applying this kind of advice, maybe for instance providing this kind of advisory services somehow conditional to the adoption of some of the measures, and like this linking somehow the services to making sure that some application of the mitigation measures are made. In any case, I'm not an expert on what are the main areas in which we could should the government focus in terms of the mitigation and reduction of emissions. Probably I read an article recently that there is a space on working on terms of the alluvial soils and peatlands for producing rice in Indonesia, and new technologies and how to manage this type of land is crucial, as it happens also in other Asian and Southeast Asian countries. But on this, it has to be and then we have to identify which are the sectors which more contribute, which some of them will be part of the agricultural sectors, and maybe as well the interaction with forests could be an important one that have to be taken into account, how the use of land in different uses, because forests can be a big contributor to mitigation as well. Thank you, and hopefully I'll be able to tackle some of the questions.
Thank you very much, Jesus. Emily, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. Some very interesting questions, and thank you especially to Professor Subianto for that discussion of the two presentations. Turning to one of the comments provided by Professor Subianto first, this question around how do you support innovation when so many of Indonesia's farms are very small, and the constraint that applies. I think, in fact, digital technologies do offer an opportunity there, because, of course, when I think if you asked people generally throughout sort of rural areas, do you have a mobile phone, for example, I suspect most people do. Mm-hmm. And many of these kind of digital tools that have the potential to improve productivity and sustainability might take the form of applications that can be accessed and used on a mobile. So it offers a very easy way of providing information and services to farmers, even those very small farmers, providing ways for them to actually learn from different advisory services and connect to markets. There may also be opportunities to overcome some of these constraints from having very small sizes, for providing a way for farmers to band together to actually offer a more aggregated production scale, to use technologies that need a slightly larger land area. For example, applications that allow farm machinery to be rented and shared among different farmers. To some extent, I think this also relates to this, I think, and I'm turning to the very last question that I think was directed to me, this question on the hype of digital technologies and whether things like blockchain, the Internet of Things, and drones, what kind of potential they hold for Indonesian agriculture. The simple question is, I think that ultimately, yes, they will. There will have ways of supporting the agricultural sector. And of course, many private agro-food companies are probably already using things like blockchain to actually to make use of more secure transactions, to transfer information, essentially information that was generated on farms through to the final end user, the final consumer of those products. So we're probably already seeing them. The question is about, what I think is the important issue is not letting the hype over these big bang kind of technologies like robotics and drones get in the way of those smaller, more low-tech potentially applications that might still yield a higher payoff and be more accessible for a lot of farmers. So like I said, this question of mobile applications, not letting hype over the potential for drones get in the way of developing mobile applications that can have a very immediate impact for a lot of farmers. There was also a question on trade, I think, and how can digital technologies support farmers in the case of standards that apply in international trade? I think I'd probably like to draw on maybe a very specific example to respond to that one, in terms of, for example, how to manage pesticide residues or other kind of chemical residues in products that might lead to products being rejected for biosecurity reasons, or might lead to products being downgraded because they don't meet private standards. Digital technologies there might play a role, for example, by helping farmers to make sure they time their chemicals correctly, apply them at the right moment so it's sufficient difference of time between the application and harvest, and also to not overuse them so that there is not an overuse that affects the overall quality of the product. So it's a very specific example in the context of standards, but essentially I'm sort of talking about the role of digital tools in providing timely information and supporting farmers to make decisions about when they conduct particular activities on farms. The final question, I think, for me was this one about what do we think probably needs to be done in terms of assessing digital agriculture and where attention might need to fall. In this respect, I think it's important to consider the risk of a digital divide. For example, these questions around, and in particular, the questions around connectivity and not letting some parts of the rural sector, some parts of the agricultural sector miss out because they can't connect to internet and digital tools. But even more importantly, the importance of skills, making sure that all stakeholders, farmers, policymakers, researchers have the kind of skills that allow them to make use of digital tools. You know, even in advanced OECD countries, when precision agriculture sort of became more and more prominent, so much of the potential of that technology wasn't fulfilled because farmers didn't really have the skills to make use of all the different options, all the different ways of taking the technology, taking the insights generated from that technology and using the data and information to change how they did they managed their farming operations. So addressing digital skills, addressing issues like connectivity, and making sure there's an enabling environment that allows data to be used and shared, but without leading to any problems, for example, around privacy, confidentiality, and other regulations. But in terms of an overall assessment, agriculture's digital transformation is happening. It's happening as part of the wider community, of wider digital transformation of the sector. So it's important to invest in getting these early things right so that the sector can benefit as much as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid our time is already 2 minutes after 16:30.
Mungkin one question, one clarification from the Dr. Jesus.
Okay.
The ownership of the 1 million food estates in Middle Kalimantan. Maybe you know well. Hello.
Okay, Bambang.
Yeah, there's a one want to ask to us from the Dr. Anton about the ownership of the 1 million food estate in Middle Kalimantan, the ownership of the land. Do you know well about that? As I know that the land is the former is the forest concession of private company. So I think that maybe now the government already acquisition that land. That's our answer, Dr. Anton, Jesus Anton. So that yes, we also worry about the ownership of that land, but I think the government already acquisition.
Yeah,
that land.
Yeah, some of the land also, actually belong to the farmers. So what's the government initiative actually improve the current production system of the already open land, not actually opening new land on that. Okay, I think time to wrap up. As a moderator, I need 2 or 3 minutes just to pinpoint some of the take-home messages from our discussion. First, related to the innovations and productivity, sustainability. Well, as far as I guess it, I have 3 points to note. First, whole set of incentive matter for innovation. So we need, comprehensive incentive system, which include economic stability and trust to innovation, to institution, market incentive for investment, capacity building, provisions of services, and also sector-specific incentive. The second point, government should ensure that agricultural innovation system more responsive to sectoral need. In this case, of course, the need of agricultural sector. And the third point I would like to note is the government also need to ensure a stable and enabling policy and regulatory environment. So very frequent changes of the policy and environment have some significant impact to the innovation system. Next, on related to the digital technology area, I have two points. First, effective policy making may require something beyond agriculture. So I think it's very clear that a lot of area, in outside of agriculture, but has some impact at the end to the development of agriculture. And the second thing, I think it's very important that agricultural policies in digital policy discussion. So it's very important for agricultural community member, including myself, to actively engage in policy discussion related to digital policy. So at the end, we have some impact to agriculture. Well, overall, I think we have a very productive discussions on this very important and strategic issues. Let's provide big hand to our guest speaker, Dr. Jesus Anton and Dr. Emily Gray. Also to our discussions, Professor Bambang Subianto. I would like also to extend our appreciation to colleagues from Executive Board of the Benido and also the Secretariat for helping us in making this webinar possible. See you again in the next seminar agenda in the future. I think that's the end of our seminar program. See you again. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, Dr. Anton.
see you
Dr.
again
Gray.
next time.
Terima kasih. Yang belum absen, terima kasih nih Bu Riris nih. Yang belum absen, nanti sertifikatnya dikirim. Mungkin dikasih waktu untuk yang mengisi absen. Jam 5 ya Pak, ya ditutup ya Pak ya. Mungkin ada yang belum absen.
Oke, jam 5.
Jam 5 ditutup ya Pak ya. Barangkali ada yang belum absen. Nanti sertifikat akan kami kirim ke emailnya masing-masing. Lagu Pak, lagu Mars.
Sebentar.
Ya, barangkali ada yang belum absen.
setia mengabdi pada negara sebagai insan cendekia, setia berbakti membangun negeri, etika peneliti, ciptakan karyamu, majukan negerimu, bangunlah bangsamu agar sejahtera, karya besar kita untuk masa depan nusa dan bangsa. Ciptakan karyamu, maju negeri agar sejahtera, karya besar kita untuk masa depan nusa dan bangsa. Indonesia Jaya. Bekerja dan berkarya nyata di dalam ilmu juga budaya. Lewat penelitian kita menjawab tantangan dunia. Setia mengabdi pada negara sebagai insan cendekia. Setia berbakti membangun negeri, etika peneliti. Ciptakan karyamu, majukan negerimu, bangunlah bangsamu agar sejahtera, karya besar kita untuk masa depan nusa dan bangsa. Ciptakan karyamu, majukan negerimu, bangunlah bangsamu agar sejahtera, karya besar kita untuk masa depan nusa dan bangsa. Indonesia Jaya.
Udah pada absen semua belum? Soalnya ini masih ada yang belum.
Link absennya error, Bu.
Link error, link absennya sebentar. Bisa, Pak? Coba lagi, Pak.
Oke, saya coba lagi ya.
Ya, kita tunggu kok absennya. Silakan, Pak, Bapak Ibu, silakan. Coba dulu. Mungkin pas internetnya kali.
Masih belum bisa, Bu.
Sebentar.
Tolong di-share lagi aja, Bu, linknya.
Iya, iya. Ngantri. Sepertinya banyak yang masuk. Di absen kita sudah 97.
Alhamdulillah saya sudah bisa ngisi, Bu.
Oke, baik. Terima kasih ya. Silakan. Sampai ketemu lagi. Ya.
Terima kasih sekali, Bu. Izin
Sama-sama.
keluar ya.
Ya. Ini kita tunggu sebentar lagi. Monggo yang belum absen sampai jam 5. Oke, sedikit lagi ya. Masih ada 21. Masih ada yang belum absen? Atau sudah semua?
Sore Bunda.
Sudah ya? Apa kabar Ibu Ros?
Miss you. Mudah-mudahan Rosi udah absen ya, Bunda.
Ya, siap-siap. Nanti saya cek ya. Oke. Kalau nanti enggak, nanti tak kabari. Ya, siap.
Amin. Alhamdulillah.
Ya, terima kasih.
Sehat
Bu.
Bunda. Muah.
Alhamdulillah sehat. Sip ya. Sampai nanti ya. Iya.
Yuk, yuk.
Iya, tinggal berapa lagi nih? Ada yang masih belum absen? Iya. Sudah selesai semua absennya? Ditutup. Sepertinya udah kali Pak ya? Nggak ada yang ini lagi?
Iya, kelihatannya.
Udah ya Pak ya? Karena udah tidak ada yang itu, mungkin dia hanya membuka saja tadi.
Ya, udah itu juga cukup kok yang ada ini.
Cukup,
Nanti
udah
kan
banyak
foto-fotonya
ini
juga.
ya. Udah Pak, cukup Pak.
Nah,
Ya oke, tutup aja Pak. Sampai ketemu nanti. Makasih banyak
tutup aja
semuanya. Ya, ya.
ya, soalnya harus bikin Zoom untuk besok rapat nih.
Ya,
Coba
besok
buka.
nanti hari Senin rapat HKM.
Enggak, ini besok pagi ada juga.
Oh, besok pagi ada ya? Besok pagi apa ya Pak?
Permintaan
Ada ya, Pak?
Pak Dudi.
Oke. Ya udah.
Iya, Pak Dudi. Dibaca aja dulu,
Oke.
Ini saya tutup ya.
Oke, tutup aja Pak ya. Tutup. Ya, makasih ya. Yuk, ya.